Well, thank you very much, Gordon. As you all probably know, Gordon is from Arizona, and I'm from Maryland, and the relationship between the East Coast of the U.S. and the Western states is probably pretty close to the relationship between Sydney and Perth, and we usually rib each other, but I have to say, in Washington, I watched Gordon transform the Mansfield Foundation into the premier institution for American exchange with Asia, and then bring that same phenomenal energy and dynamism to the Perth US Asia Center. So Gordon, I don't know what's in the water in Arizona. I know there's not a lot of it, but whatever it is, we need it in Maryland, and especially in Washington. Congratulations, and I think it's the first scenario. I hope to emulate your success when I move to Sydney. My wife and I haven't decided where we're gonna live yet. Earlier, Mr. Albanese was leaning on me pretty heavily to move to his district. Peter Harcher told me that he doesn't need the votes, but I guess you can't be too safe. And my only regret is my wife Eileen isn't here, because I haven't had more nice things said about me since my wedding, and she's not going to believe me. Fortunately, Andrew Shearer and Caroline Shearer were at my wedding, so I'm going to need you to vouch for me with Eileen when she gets here. It's a huge honor to be with so many distinguished stewards of our alliance. Particularly to have Prime Minister Morrison and Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Albanese. It's a real reminder that the strength of our alliance is the breadth and depth of bipartisanship in both capitals. And I can tell you, having worked on many alliances that the United States has in this region, that's not always the case. And we are truly blessed. And as the Chargé said, we're lucky as Americans to have Australia as an ally. And I have to say tonight, it is a particular personal privilege. And thank you, Mark and John, for sitting me next to, I'm an American, so I'm going to say Prime Minister John Howard. You heard from Prime Minister Howard, you heard from Arthur, what they experienced on 9/11. Let me tell you what it was like to be in the White House working for President Bush on that day. We were angry, we were scared, frankly, we felt alone. And Condoleezza Rice, the National Security Advisor, called some of us and said, the Australian Prime Minister is going to invoke ANZUS. And Tom Schiefer, our ambassador, was not the only one who broke down in tears. The news was electric. We realized in an instant we were not alone. And, you know, in the days that followed, the Grenadier Guards played the Star-Spangled Banner at Buckingham Palace, and Le Monde, the newspaper in France, had the headline, Nous sommes tous Américains. The Japanese dispatched forces abroad for the first time since World War II. There were huge statements and demonstrations of support, but Australia was first. And I will never forget that. And those of us who were in the White House at the time will never forget that. We're grateful. It was several years later, I had the great joy of being the note taker for many of Mr. Howard's conversations with President Bush. As you know, they both speak like a Hemingway novel, subject, verb, object. It was very easy to be note taker. And it was several years later that the Prime Minister described to President Bush his vision for what would become the U.S. Studies Center. And in those days, there were polls that showed an alarming drop in support for the alliance, particularly among younger Australians in the wake of the Iraq War. And, you know, for too long, we had counted on, in both governments, the sentiment captured by the GIs and the diggers and the Battle of the Coral Sea. My grandfather was a World War I Marine. My dad was a Vietnam War era Marine. My brother was a Marine for the wars in the Middle East. And they all said there's no one they'd rather serve alongside than the ADF. And a lot of people who worked in the alliance had that strong sense of attachment. But a younger generation didn't feel it. And I have to say, gathering today, 15, 16 years later, we're in a completely different place. Support for the alliance in Australia is as robust as we've ever seen. It's true in the United States. You can see it in the bipartisan support for AUKUS in both countries. I conducted a survey at CSIS of leaders in American business, labor, universities, members of Congress, a couple hundred leading Americans. And we asked the question in the survey, how much risk should the United States take to support our allies in Asia? It's an interesting question no one had ever asked. And if you said 1, that meant no risk. And if you said 10, it meant the most significant possible risk. So Korea got 8, the mean was 8, Japan got 9. For Australia, it was over 10, it was almost 10. And among members of Congress, it was a perfect 10. So as we gather tonight to celebrate the 70th plus anniversary of ANZUS, and we think about some of those questionable periods, I have to say the AAA, the U.S. Study Center, the Perth U.S. Asia Center, everyone in this room has worked on the alliance. You should take enormous pride in what you've accomplished and enormous pride in the no-nonsense pragmatism on both sides of the aisle, on both sides of the Pacific, of the American and Australian people. I'm particularly excited about moving here, not just because of the strength of the alliance, but because of the challenges, because we are entering a new phase of the alliance, as several people have said, that's much more complicated, much more complex, much more multidimensional. How will we protect our advantages in emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and quantum without breaking the global economy into 2 pieces where all the advantages of reduced latency, increased productivity evaporate? How will we defend democracy, values we share, against internal backsliding in many countries, foreign interference, without alienating important partners we have in this region? How will we keep reinforcing stability and deterrence with AUKUS, with the Quad, while still keeping alive the idea we had not too long ago of a broader and more inclusive regional architecture in Asia? How will we find the constituencies, and they're there, a majority, in the United States that will support free trade and a digital trade agreement? And how will we bring together the voices to do that? These are questions I think that are, as earlier speaker said, beyond government. These are not all of government questions, they're all of society questions. And it seems to me that Gordon and I and others in this room have an opportunity to bring together those voices from government, from the private sector, from the academy, to try to find the solutions we need and try to shape the debate and the discussion. The U.S., as you all know, is big, it's complicated, but as my colleague, a fellow professor at Georgetown, the late and very dearly missed Madeleine Albright would often say, the United States is the indispensable country. The British Foreign Secretary, Lord Carrington, in the 1980s had another way of putting it. After sitting through a long meeting with his European counterparts, listening to complaints about Ronald Reagan, Lord Carrington looked to his colleagues and said, yes, everything you say about the Americans is true, but they're the only Americans we have. When ANZUS was signed in 1951, the United States controlled over half of global economic output. By 1971, that fell to about 25%, and today it's just a bit below that. The reason the United States sustained global leadership was because of our innovation, because of our alliances, but also because we are what Professor John Eikenberry calls a liberal Leviathan, the first hegemonic power in history to extend transparency and the rule of law to the international system, and to make it possible for other powers, proud powers, that played by those same rules to shape the rules and to even shape the foreign policy of the United States. The rise of China has made this more complicated. We, in the United States, have made it sometimes difficult for our closest friends over the past few years, I will confess. But the operating software of the American-led system remains the same. And so it's absolutely in American interests that our best friends truly study us, warts and all, that they understand us and that they help to make us better. So I'm very excited to be moving to Sydney. I'm proud as an American to be contributing to this mission at the center. And I want to congratulate you all on a wonderful evening, and with deep, deep thanks for welcoming me to be part of, this team. Thank you.